Hello, hello, blissful parents. Michelle Abraham, your host here today. I am joined with Greg Peterson. Greg, how are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, blissful parents, you're in for a treat today. We have not had an expert on our show talking anything about what we're going to talk about today. So this is really exciting. Let me share a little bit more about Greg with you guys. So Greg has got a fabulous podcast, and he's got a business called urbanfarm.org. So what if there was a garden and a fruit tree in every yard? This is a question that Greg ponders every day. For over 32 years, he created one of Phoenix's top first environmental showcase homes for urban farming. The quarter-acre farm featured a primarily edible landscape with over 80 fruit trees, rainwater and gray water harvesting, solar applications, and extensive use of reclaimed land and recycled building materials. And in 2003, urbanfarm.org was created as an online portal for urban farming education. And then in 2015, Greg created the urbanfarmpodcast.com that is just 6 years in the making. That's a lot of time. That's a long time in podcasting world, guys. And over 700 episodes, which is amazing. And that's 3.2 million listens to date. So on his days off, he hangs out in the garden with Heidi, his sweetheart, and Kismet, their pooch, creating new projects and catching some rays. So, Greg, this is really exciting. And for our blissful parents that may not know either, I live totally off the grid too. So this is a topic I'm very excited to talk about as well. Yeah.
Cool.
I don't think you knew that either.
I didn't.
No. So I live off the grid, but we also live boat access only. So we have to drive a boat to our house. And we have everything is on solar power and hydropower that we've created with a water turbine ourselves. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're truly off the grid.
We are totally off the grid. Yeah.
Wow.
Can't drive to our house. Yeah. So let's dive into all about you, Greg. I want to hear all about Urban Farm and what inspired you to start an urban farm in Phoenix?
Well, the easy answer is I was born with it. Mm. At a very young age, I was interested in fish aquariums. I got my first fish aquarium at the age of 9.
Cool.
And I was interested because I wanted to learn how to grow fish for people to eat. Mm. And fast forward a few years, I was 14 years old. I wrote a paper on how we were overfishing the oceans for an 8th grade paper. Who knows? I have no idea where that came from. And a few more years later, in 1981, I designed on paper what we would now call a regenerative farm, where so in our humanness, there's waste. In nature, there is no waste. So if we look at natural systems and start replicating and mimicking natural systems, in theory, we could get to a place where everything that is produced on a farm could be used as a resource to put back into it or as food. And so this is, this goes back 50 years for me, this interest. And in 2001, I was back in college at Arizona State University getting my bachelor's degree. And I had to write a mission and vision for my life. And at that point, I'd been living in the home that I was in for about 12 years. And I had turned the landscape into an edible food forest.
Cool.
You just walk out into the backyard and front yard and harvest food. And so I created a mission in that moment that looked like what the urban farm turned into, which was I called it an environmental showcase home that we'd open up 6 to 8 times a year for people to come in and see tours. So what they saw was an edible landscape, lots of fruit trees growing in the desert, and solar panels on the roof, and rainwater and gray water harvesting, and really, what might it take to live more lightly on the planet was really the question that I threw out to people. And so they got to see how to do chickens in the city and how to grow fruit trees and like that. So.
And how difficult was that to grow so many varieties of fruit in an urban environment?
Well, the varieties of fruit are dependent on your area.
Right. Phoenix, I'm sure we got lots of different lemons and oranges and all sorts of things that we would be able to do here in the west coast of BC. But
Exactly. And so citrus grows great there, and we can grow about 24 different kinds of apples, peaches, apricots, plums, those kinds of things. Now, I live in Asheville, North Carolina now, and that 24 grows exponentially here because of, there's a myriad of different things that go into growing fruit in an area. And there's just a lot more different varieties that will grow in Asheville, North Carolina.
So what's happened to the house in Phoenix?
Oh my gosh, I found an incredible family that so I lived in that house for 32 years. I nurtured the soil, I nurtured the landscape, and I used to bring in kids. This was so much fun. I used to bring in young kids to the space, and I'd pull a carrot out of the ground and I'd take a bite out of it, and the light that went on in their brain when that happened was like, wow, that's where so food comes from. So the family that purchased the urban farm in Phoenix is, they actually ran a community garden for homeless people in Phoenix for 10 years. So the space that I worked on for 32 years is in very good hands.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then what's your plans in North Carolina?
I wanted someplace quieter and that got more rain, that I could grow things more easily. And moving to, North Carolina qualifies for all that. And moving here is a big learning adventure for me. If I look out the window in my house in Phoenix, I can tell you any trees that I see, I know exactly what they are. I know what they grow. I know how they grow because I'd been growing them there for 54 years when I left.
Wow.
And so it's a new adventure here. I've actually hired a crew to help me figure out the landscapes here and what to plant and what grows and so on and so on.
Fascinating. That's so cool. And I think that's really interesting what you've done. And it's so cool how I just love your story about the kids, like the aha of growing the food. And I know my kids have been exposed to my mother-in-law is a gardener, and they grow beans and peas and all sorts of things in the garden here. My kids just love going out to the backyard and eating stuff off of trees and things. And it's just this like a whole different experience for them too.
That's so cool. The thing. If you get kids, and I've seen this happen so many times. I did tours at the urban farm for over 20 years. And I had a parent one time call me after a tour and they say, "What did you do?" And I said, "Oh, what did I do?" And they said, "My kids are eating broccoli." I think it was broccoli that we picked in they're actually eating broccoli, and they never liked broccoli before. If we can get our kids at a very young age to get their hands in the dirt and get them connected with where food comes from. Food does not come from the grocery store.
Right.
Food comes from the ground. If we can get them to get that, magic happens.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so cool to see. And, bringing you on today, we wanted to talk about like growing our own food and how a garden can really change a child's health forever. So how do parents like that maybe are living in the city? I mean, we have the luxury of living on 6.5 acres of prime real estate for growing all sorts of things. But for people that don't, I still, I'm not a gardener myself, and I really need to pay more attention to it and figure out how to like get my hands in the dirt and do more in there when I'm off of the technology here. But for our families who want to start incorporating this and maybe live in the city environment, like, what are your suggestions for getting started?
Well, first of all, start simple. Don't go spend $1,000 or $10,000 on garden supplies.
Right.
Start simple. The most expensive thing to buy in the grocery store and the easiest thing to grow are herbs.
Yes, agreed.
Grow basil in a windowsill.
Yeah.
Right. And be patient with yourself. In my podcast, on the Urban Farm podcast, one of the questions I ask all my guests, my first-time guests, is tell me about a time you failed and what you learned from it. I promise you, I have killed more plants and more trees than all your listeners probably combined in 50 years of 45 years of growing food. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. Obviously, it's sad when you kill a plant and so on and so on, but it's okay if something doesn't make it. It's your opportunity to learn. Exactly.
That's a good way of looking at it, because I always say, like, I kill all the plants we have, but I can keep children alive. So like, that is like...
If you can keep children alive, you can keep plants alive. No question in my mind. Yeah. So, and then there's the other piece is the health piece of growing your own food. Mm-hmm. And this is really important. There has been studies that have been done that show that kids are healthier if they're eating organic food. Food that is grown without pesticides, without herbicides, without chemicals. It is better for us. I only eat organic food. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it is. And there's the process of the industrial farming system in this country is, on one hand, it's a miracle that we can actually feed 330 million people a day, 3 times ish. That's a miracle. And that's our industrial food system. The other side of the coin is that our industrial food system provides us with chemical laden manufactured food products. And that's, they actually call it that in the industry. These are manufactured food products. And they're not good for our health. And by growing your own food, you can control what's going into it. You know, you can grow an organic garden. And so the food is healthier for you. It is picked at its peak of ripeness. So it's most tasty, and at the same time, it's most nutritious for you.
Wow. When I was at nutrition school, way back in another career of mine, one of the things that was surprising to me to learn is that actually the frozen vegetables and fruit are actually healthier for you than the fresh ones, because they're actually frozen at a different state, like when they're actually fresher and have more nutrients in them. So fascinating.
Exactly. So here's something that people don't know. You pick a peach when it's not ripe because it has to be shipped 3,000 miles or 400 miles or 8,000 miles. It's picked when it's not most nutrient dense. The moment you pick it, the nutrients start declining. Right. If you've ever eaten a peach from a grocery store and it's like, oh, this is cardboard. Or a tomato from a grocery store and it's like, why even bother? That's why. They're using chemicals to grow it. They're picking it early. And it's just, it's not nutrient dense for you enough.
Wow. So now I have another question about the soil these days, because I under the impression that the soil these days is not rich enough for us to actually get the nutrients then into the food. That now? What about if we were to start a garden in the city, in our home or backyard? Would that soil then produce nutrient dense food, or would we have to supplement that soil?
So great question. And what's happened in our country around our soils that we grow food in is all of the micronutrients. So there's macronutrients. You may have heard of NPK, nitrogen, potassium. I can't remember off the top of my head what the third one is. That's the macronutrients. That's the stuff that make your plants grow. Right. It doesn't make them healthy. The micronutrients are the things in the soil that make the food healthy. And what's happened with our farmland over the past 50 to 70 years is all of the micronutrients, or a lot of the micronutrients, have disappeared. They're using chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides and herbicides on the soil, which is negatively impacting the soil life. And the soil life has a lot to do with being able to mine those micronutrients and make them available for the plants. So basically what we've done in the past 50 plus years in this country is we've used up the soil. So your job, and I have some classes about this that are free online, your job as a gardener is to create healthy soil. And it's actually super simple. There's 5 components of healthy soil. You have one of them. It's called dirt. It's the stuff that's out in your yard. It's broken down rocks. It's got micronutrients in it. It's just that the plants can't access it really well. So the 5 components of healthy soil are dirt, airspace, or water, dirt, airspace, water, organic matter, and everything that's alive in the soil. So the super simple thing to do to fix broken dirt is add organic matter. And you add that in the form of worm poop, they call it worm castings, compost, planting mix. And you can, upon arriving here in Asheville, I found a couple of soil companies that actually make bagged soil, specifically that's healthy. It's got the right nutrients in it. It's got a lot of that already in it. It's not cheap. That's, in fact, the number one thing for you to do to get a healthy garden growing is to build healthy soil. Mm-hmm. So if you buy cheap soil, mm-hmm. that's the result you're going to expect.
Right.
And, building soil in pots is easier because you buy this potting mix mm-hmm. and you put it in the pot. In the ground, it's a little harder. It takes a little bit longer. I would say here in my new property, that's my front yard and back of me. Mm. Here in Asheville, it's probably going to take me a good 3 to 4 years to get the soil really healthy and growing vibrantly.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
And so when we have soil, we have compost in our yards. Mm-hmm. Do we just take the compost directly and put it into the soil and mix it all together? Or
you can absolutely do that.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm a no-till person, because when you till up soil, there's microorganisms and millions of them in soil. And just in the soil, there's different soil strata. So starting at the top, there will be different microorganisms as there are 2 inches down, and 4 inches down, there's different microorganisms than there are 8 inches down. Mm-hmm. So when we till the soil, we mess all that up. So if you have a brand new garden, like my garden here, I'm going to till it the first time. Right. To get it started. And then what I do is I add 2 to 4 inches of fresh compost every year or two to the top, and I grow on top of that.
Got it. Okay. Mm-hmm, that makes sense. And in fact, you have a healthysoilhacked.com toolkit for our parents too, if they want to make healthier soil for that. So you can actually get nutrients out of your vegetables and fruit. Do you have some statistics on like how like a little like actual nutrients are in our food these days?
Oh, I'm sure I do. I'd have to dig way back here in the Wayback Machine.
One of the ones that I remember from nutrition school is like scary. It was like you had to eat, I think it was 9 oranges to get the same amount of vitamin C that you used to be able to get from 2 oranges in like the 1950s or something like that. Like that's one that's stuck in my head from nutrition school like 10 years ago. But that was 10 years ago, so I'm sure it's even worse now.
Well, and there's a real easy fix. Mm-hmm. To all of this, we build healthy soil. We add lots of organic matter to our soil. Mm-hmm. There's actually additives that we can add to the soil called mycorrhiza, which is soil life that brings that in. And once your soil gets established, all that mycorrhiza is in there, that bacteria and the mushrooms. I get this question from people all the time. Oh my gosh, I have mushrooms growing in my yard. How do I kill them? If you have mushrooms growing in your yard, you're doing something right.
That's a good thing.
That's a really good thing. Absolutely.
Cool. We live in the west coast of Canada, and our forest here, like in Octoberish, I can count like 15 different kinds of mushrooms. It's like just in the forest, and it's so interesting how different they all look too. Like they look like brains, or they look orange, or they're red, or they're like so crazy. Mushrooms is an interesting plant. But let's go back to the kids again for a second. For parents that are wanting to get going. So the first thing they should, I would imagine, the first thing to like get them going, get kids excited to start growing some basil or cilantro or something, or mint or something like in the windowsill to start getting excited about it.
Yeah, and if you're doing that with kids, have it be something that they want to eat. So mint would be really good, probably not basil, although they're in the same family.
Yeah, my kids love the basil. They love going out there and picking and bringing it.
Very good. The other thing about that is that kids love starting seeds. There's this wonder of, I'm going to take this little brown dot and I'm going to put it in a pot and I'm going to water it. And in 2 or 3 or 8 days, something's going to happen. Something's going to spring out of this pot. And oh, by the way, when it's 60 days old, if it was a basil seed, you can eat basil off of it. You can actually eat it.
That's so
cool. Engaging them in the wonder of it is really, yeah. The other thing is,
the schools have started doing that too. Like, they oftentimes will come home with something they planted at school, which is super
right.
Cool. Thank you, schools, for getting them excited about that.
Exactly. The other thing is that composting is really important. And I get this question from people all the time. I have kitchen scraps. How do I start a compost bin? And if all you have is kitchen scraps, you don't have enough stuff for a compost bin. Right. But what you do have, and this is where the kids love it, what you do have is enough scraps for a worm bin. Composting worms are amazing at what they do. I remember this, my nephew came to the house with his Boy School troop maybe 10 years ago, and we had a worm bin in the backyard. And I was showing them the worms, and, boys and worms, and they were all about it, right? I don't know. He was probably 8 or 9 years old. And one of the kids says, "Ooh, why don't you eat one?" So we had that whole conversation as well. And they ended up eating one. But anytime we can engage them at that level, pull a carrot out of the ground and eat it with the dirt on it.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Right? That gets them going. And whenever I have kids at the urban farm, there's so many things to eat in the front yard, because over the course of 32 years, I used a particular kind of seed, one called an open pollinated seed. Basically what it is it's a seed that will grow a plant, will go to seed, and that seed that you get from that plant, if you plant it again, you're going to get pretty much an exact duplicate of the plant you planted at first, right? So what I used to do with the urban farm, and what I'll do here, is I just grab those seeds and I spread them everywhere. And at any given moment, there's 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 different kinds of things growing in the yard that are edible, that have been there really decade over decade. And so what I do is with the kids in the front yard is I just walk around and I say, "Ooh, try this." And I pull a piece of oxalis. It's a 3-leaf clover looking thing. And I said, "Try this, eat this." And it tastes like lemon.
Oh, cool.
It's lemony. And I had nasturtiums growing in my front yard, which are edible flowers, and they're kind of little radish tasting like. And so anytime we can get the kids engaging with the food landscape around our yards, we're just going to be that much better off. And it sets in habits for them for life that, oh my gosh, that's what broccoli tastes like. I'll go ahead and eat broccoli, and we're off to the races.
You saw where it came from. Yeah.
Yep,
That's
exactly.
really cool. Oh, I love it. Well, Greg, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I know it's so fascinating. I have another couple questions for you before I let you go. Now,
Please.
One is on Urban Farm. urbanfarm.org is your website. Yep. Now, you have a bunch of things going on over there. Tell us a little bit about some of the courses you have.
Very good. So we actually have put together multiple courses on how to garden. We have our Jumpstart Your Urban Farm class. It's 4-course, which is 4 classes. It walks you through, how does my urban garden fit into the urban farm arena in my neighborhood, in my city? So that's a kind of a bigger look on how we integrate into our food system. We have Growing Food, the Basics, which is a 9-class course on growing food. It's the basics of growing food. You will learn everything you need to know about growing food in that course. We have a seed saving course. We have one on introduction to permaculture. We didn't talk about permaculture, but I like to call permaculture the art and science of working with nature. So how do we plug into the flow of nature rather than trying to work against nature? Nature's always going to win. And we have one on aquaponics and
so many cool things. Yeah. So you can find all those courses over at urbanfarm.org. And Greg, what's your big vision with Urban Farm?
In 1991, I did a course at Landmark Education, and this was 31 years ago. I was 31 years old, so it was half my life ago that this happened. And I created this vision that I am the person on the planet responsible for transforming our global food system. And I don't interact with that like a burden. I interact with that like, oh my gosh, this is what I get to do today. And we do that with gardens in our front and backyard. Our global food system is fixed and thriving in our front and backyard. But, and one more thing. When I went back to college, at the age of 39. And one of the things that I did while I was in college was I farmed my front and backyard. So at the age of 40 years old, I was growing food in my front and backyard. I was harvesting it every week, taking it to a local farmer's market. I'd come home with, $200 or $300 cash for 8 hours worth of work. And anything I had left over at the market, I had a friend of mine that owned a restaurant. I took it to her and she fed me lunch. So if you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, or if you have a teenage kid that wants to start a little business, start growing food. And a lot of farmers markets these days have community booths so you just grow a lot of basil. You package it up once a week and take it to the community booth and they'll sell it for you and then they'll pay you. Wouldn't that be great for a teenage kid to get going in?
Right. Yeah. Great little business. I love it.
Yeah.
Good idea. So cool. So Greg, anything that you'd like to share with our parents before I let you go?
Don't be afraid to fail, to lose plants. It happens. Be curious. Be curious about what's going on in that pot or with that plant and figure it out and, get your kids, pull your kids in. It's like, okay, this tomato plant here is doing really good. And this one over here is looking wilty. What does Google say about that? Or DuckDuckGo or one of the, figure that out because there's so much to learn. Plus it gets us away from, the technology and that kind of stuff. It gets the kids outside with their hands in the dirt.
I love it. So cool. And nothing better than, even for parents too, meditative, de-stressing, get your hands in the dirt kind of way.
Amen to that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Greg, for joining us today. It's been super fun having you. We've learned lots of great things. Blissful parents out there, go check out urbanfarm.org, see what you can discover there with you and your kids, and make sure you reach out to Greg. All right. Talk to you guys soon. See you all next week.